After more than 3 decades behind bars, Erik Menendez's dream of freedom has just been shattered in the most dramatic way possible. Imagine spending over 35 years inside a prison cell, clinging to hope, waiting for the day you might finally walk free. For Erik Menendez, that dream came crashing down in a cold and decisive verdict: parole denied, in a marathon hearing that pulled in family testimony, emotional confessions, and chilling reminders of a crime that shocked America back. In 1989, the California Parole Board chose to keep Erik locked up. Despite heartfelt pleas from 18 family members, despite Erik's own attempt to share his side of the story, and despite the years of public debate surrounding abuse, trauma, and justice, the answer was clear. Tonight, we dive deep into the twists and contradictions of Erik's parole hearing, the shocking reasons the board gave for its decision, and why this moment is being called one of the most defining chapters in the decades-long Menendez saga. Stay tuned, because this story only gets more dramatic. The news hit headlines fast. Erik Menendez denied parole after decades behind bars. For some, it was expected. For others, it was a shocking blow to the narrative of redemption that has surrounded the Menendez brothers for years. But why does this story matter? To answer that, we need to rewind. Back in 1989, Beverly Hills was rocked by a gruesome double murder that felt ripped straight out of a Hollywood thriller. 2 young brothers, Erik and Lyle Menendez, stood accused of killing their wealthy parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, in their lavish mansion. The motive? That's where things became complicated. Prosecutors argued it was pure greed, sons, who wanted the family fortune. The brothers, however, painted a much darker picture, claiming they were victims of years of abuse, both emotional and sexual, at the hands of their father. The trials became media circuses, the courtroom drama televised across the nation, dividing public opinion like few cases before it. Fast forward 3 decades later, both brothers serving life sentences, their case re-examined in documentaries, podcasts, and endless debates. Earlier this year, a judge's decision made them eligible for parole, sparking hope among supporters who believed the brothers had already paid their debt. But when Erik finally got his chance, standing before the parole board, the result was crushing. Denied. Not because of what happened that night in 1989 alone, but because of a long and troubling history behind bars, filled with contradictions, violations, and a past the board simply couldn't overlook. So why exactly was Erik's plea rejected? And what does this mean for Lyle, whose parole hearing is just around the corner? Let's break down the story step by step. To understand why Erik Menendez's parole hearing became such a pivotal moment, we have to revisit the story that made the Menendez brothers infamous. It was August 20th, 1989, in the wealthy enclave of Beverly Hills, California. Inside their luxurious mansion, Jose and Kitty Menendez, parents of Erik and his older brother Lyle, were brutally gunned down. The weapon? Shotguns. The killers? Their very own sons. The crime scene was horrifying. Kitty and Jose were left with multiple gunshot wounds, the kind of violence that sent shockwaves through even the hardened detectives who first walked into the house. What looked like a home invasion soon began to unravel into something far darker. At first, Erik and Lyle appeared to be grieving sons. They cried in public, they attended memorial services, and they acted like victims of a tragic loss. But behind the scenes, suspicion grew. The brothers went on a massive spending spree in the weeks after the murders. Lavish shopping trips, luxury cars, Rolex watches, and even investments in a restaurant business. For investigators, this sudden burst of wealth and confidence looked like guilt. Eventually, the truth surfaced. Erik, racked with guilt, confessed to his psychologist about the killings. When those admissions became known, both brothers were arrested and charged with murder. What followed was one of the most sensational trials of the 1990s. Televised to millions, the Menendez brothers' case turned into a spectacle of legal drama, family trauma, and public fascination. Prosecutors painted them as cold-blooded killers motivated by greed. The defense, however, presented a chilling counter-narrative. The brothers had endured years of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse at the hands of their father, Jose. The defense claimed the murders were not about money, but about survival. Erik and Lyle said they lived in constant fear, convinced that one day their father would kill them. Their mother, Kitty, they argued, knew about the abuse but did nothing to protect them. The country was divided. Some viewers, especially survivors of abuse, sympathized with the brothers, and saw them as victims who snapped under unbearable trauma. Others dismissed the claims, seeing only spoiled rich kids who killed for inheritance. The trials ended with both brothers convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At that point, it seemed the Menendez saga had reached its end. But decades behind bars brought new developments. Documentaries, true crime series, and social media fueled renewed interest in their case. Supporters argued that the system had failed to consider the full context of abuse, while critics insisted the brutality of the murders outweighed everything else. Earlier this year, a judge sentenced Erik and Lyle, making them eligible for parole after more than 30 years in prison. For Erik, this parole hearing wasn't just a routine procedure. It was the first real chance at freedom he had seen since 1989. To many, this hearing represented a test. Could Erik convince the board that he was rehabilitated, remorseful, and no longer a danger to society? Or would his past and the weight of his crimes still chain him to life behind bars? The answer came loud and clear. On the day of Erik Menendez's parole hearing, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. This wasn't just a routine check-in with prison authorities. This was the moment Erik had been waiting for over 3 decades. A marathon session unfolded, with hours of testimony, family statements, and questions from the parole board. At the center of it all was Erik himself. For the first time in years, he had the chance to directly plead for his freedom. He recounted the fateful night of August 20th, 1989, when he and his brother Lyle killed their parents. But his words were far from consistent. On one hand, Erik admitted he had not acted purely in self-defense. At one point, he stated plainly, "I did not kill my parents in self-defense." Yet, moments later, he claimed he feared for his life, saying he was convinced his father was preparing to rape him that night and that he felt death was imminent. This contradiction did not go unnoticed. For the board, it raised serious doubts about Erik's clarity, remorse, and honesty. Adding to this was the testimony of 18 family members. One after another, they spoke in Erik's favor. They described him as a changed man, someone who had lived through unimaginable trauma, grown over time, and deserved a second chance at life outside prison walls. Their pleas were heartfelt, emotional, and powerful. But in the end, they weren't enough. Board of Parole Commissioner Robert Barton delivered the key verdict. Parole denied, and his reasoning cut straight to the core. Barton said Erik still posed an unreasonable risk to public safety. He pointed not only to the brutality of the 1989 murders, but also to Erik's criminal conduct before and during his time in prison. Past criminal behavior before the murders, burglaries and schemes, signs that Erik's pattern of unlawful behavior stretched back years. The murders themselves, Barton specifically highlighted the killing of Kitty Menendez, describing it as devoid of human compassion. He acknowledged allegations that Jose had been abusive, but emphasized that Erik was not in imminent danger that night, undermining the defense of survival. Perhaps most damaging, however, was Erik's long record of serious prison violations. Over 35 years behind bars, Erik had built a troubling track record that included 2013 tax fraud scam. Erik admitted he partnered with a violent prison gang to run a scheme involving fraudulent tax returns. He justified it as a survival tactic, saying he jumped at the opportunity to gain protection in an extremely violent environment. But to the parole board, it showed he was still capable of manipulation and criminal activity. Menendez 7, violation. He was written up for lying to and manipulating prison staff, as well as inappropriate physical contact with a visitor during chapel visits. 7, incident with his wife. Erik's then-wife Tammy visited with her young daughter. Prison staff alleged the two engaged in sexual activity in front of the child. Annie's allegation Erik denied, claiming it was only affectionate snuggling. Regardless, it was written up as misconduct. Aggressive behavior in 1999. He was temporarily placed on non-contact status with his wife due to aggressive behavior, drug manipulation schemes. At various points, Erik was accused of convincing other inmates to buy him drugs, then leaving unpaid debts behind when transferred to a new prison. Each of these incidents may have seemed minor on its own, but stacked together, they painted a picture of a man who never truly abandoned manipulative or criminal tendencies. Commissioner Barton summarized it bluntly. Despite decades behind bars, despite therapy, despite family yet shown the level of rehabilitation or accountability required for release. His actions, both in the past and in prison, still posed risks that society could not afford to gamble on.